Hey, what's going on, guys? Nikhil here, back with another video, and in 7 Principles of Training series, we're going to go through principle number 2, and principle number 2 is overload. As many other people know, it's progressive overload. Going into the definition of overload, training must get harder over time. Now, there are two parts to that definition. There's get harder. Now, when something gets harder, we increase the volume part of it. And in order to increase the volume, we have 3 factors we can increase. We can increase the number of sets we're doing each session, increase the number of reps, or increase the weight that we use. So, keeping all else equal, increasing one of these 3 variables will increase our volume per week or per microcycle, and we want to move into gain progressive overload every microcycle, and then moving on to every macrocycle and macrocycle, the overload is going to go up. Now, the whole principle and intuition behind overload is that we must introduce a stimulus that was greater than the one before in order to warrant adaptation. So what that means is, think of it like coffee, right? When you have 1 cup of coffee, over a certain amount of time, your body would have almost built up a tolerance or a resistance to the amount of caffeine you get from that coffee, meaning that you don't get those nice wired effects that you get. You get like this intense focus, increased levels of focus, awareness, and etc. After a while, maybe 1 to 2 weeks of taking 1 cup of coffee every day, you don't feel those effects anymore because you've built a tolerance, you've adapted to it. So then you have to move up to 2 cups, then 3 cups, then 4 cups, then 5 cups maybe if you're that crazy. But then, once you hit 5 cups, there's nowhere to go from there. You can't increase anymore. Then you have to bring it back down, go through a period of where you don't have any coffee, right, for maybe 1 to 2 weeks, a month, something like that. Then you can start again. Now, using that analogy, that is the analogy we're going to go through when we're going through the principle of overload. Because the second part is that it's over time. So now the over time factor is displayed in this graph here, where on the y-axis I have volume, and on the x-axis I have time. So then now, see, if we just ignore the rest of this graph here and look at the first part, we slowly go up in volume. So we are increasing volume, it's going up through one of these factors, or maybe both, or all 3, depending on your choice. And then it's going to go up over time, right? This is a microcycle, this is a week of training, it's going to go up, and then here, this little dip here in volume over a short amount of time, that is our deload week. That is when we have to, take back, rest, let the body recover and adapt to the training stimulus we have provided in this mesocycle right here. Sorry, forgive me if I call it a microcycle. This is a mesocycle, so it's about 4 to 6 weeks of training here. And then we deload, we dissipate fatigue, we allow our body to also resensitize at a very micro level to our training stimulus, and then we hit it again. Now notice another thing is that here this triangle went a little bit higher than the first one. This is progressive overload in the macro sense, where we're looking at a series of mesocycles, a series of maybe 6 months of training, moving on to a year of training, that it's progressively getting harder. So then carries on, we accumulate volume again, we deload. The same thing, the triangle, the next mesocycle, it goes up a lot higher in volume, and then we deload, and then dotted lines. We just continue this process over and over again. Now, just gain a quick review of what I just said here. This one triangle here is a mesocycle. This whole graph here is a macrocycle. So the general trend is that our volume must go up, right? The general trend is that it's going up, and then we're taking these little deloads in between, because sometimes we have to resensitize ourselves, dissipate the fatigue, so we can hit it again hard. Because if you are training effectively and using progressive overload, you will use the technique of functional overreaching. I will go into functional overreaching into another video, but it is using the concept of exceeding your MRV in order to create a much greater adaptive stimulus. And going above your MRV and functionally overreaching is essentially training to failure at its pinnacle, where you're pushing your body beyond its limits and really creating that huge amount of overload. You're literally overloading the system, and then it requires you, once you've overloaded the system, it's taken on too much, it's taken on more than it can usually handle. Then you need a time period where you allow yourself to recover and to adapt to the stimulus that you have provided to it. And now, in terms of bodybuilding, I mentioned volume. I didn't mention anything about intensity except for the weight part. Now, when it comes to strength training, you'll notice that this graph will actually be inverse. You'll start off here high and then you'll drop down, and then start off high and then drop down again. It'll kind of be the exact opposite of this. That's kind of a powerlifting and a strength training approach to the overload principle, where you're trying to get stronger. Now, unrelated periodization does a great job of this, of managing fatigue and gaining a lot of strength, but it is not to build muscle, because this is the 7 principles of training, and I'm putting it in the context of bodybuilding and gaining muscle. And if you want to gain muscle, you have to progressively overload your body with respect to volume. You have to always increase volume again and again. Your volume must go higher over time, and then obviously you take strategic deloads in between those periods of going higher and lower, so you can actually allow the body to recover and adapt. Now, you may have noticed I have used the word MRV. That means maximum recoverable volume. Now, if you want to know more about that, I will link a video in the description where I go through what is MRV and all the kinds of things like MEV, MAV, mesocycles, macrocycles, microcycles. I go through all the definitions of that in my volume video in the Muscle Builder series, part 3. I'll link that in the description below. But overload is the second most important principle after specificity. Because if you are not specific with your training, and you are training for strength, and you are overloading intensity, you will get a shitload stronger, but you will not build any muscle. And that is the big problem. People are 2 rep maxing, 3 rep maxing, even 1 rep maxing, and oh by God, you are getting stronger, but you are not building any muscle. And people are asking the question, why am I getting stronger and not getting bigger? It's because you are overloading the wrong systems. When you are training for strength, you are overloading the central nervous system. Not the central nervous system, but you're overloading the nervous system. Right? You're getting more efficient in telling your muscles to produce a lot of force. But that is not our goal. We want to build more muscle. And in order to build more muscle, we need to accumulate more volume, because volume is an independent factor of muscle growth and hypertrophy. And it's also an independent factor of fatigue. Because it does generate a lot of fatigue, we do have to take these planned deloads. But in terms of muscle hypertrophy, volume encompasses muscle damage, metabolic stress, mechanical tension. It incorporates things like time and attention, incorporates all of those things holistically. So now when we increase that, we increase everything else and we generate that muscular hypertrophy. And then when you do become a higher level athlete, a higher level lifter, you will start to focus on more of the minute principles encompassed within volume, but that's for a later stage. Because this is a principle, it is a fundamental rule, right? We're not going to go through the specifics. We just want to say, in order to build muscle, we need to add more volume to our workout, and we need to do it in a strategic manner so that 1, we don't burn out, 2, we actually don't go backwards. Because when you do just constantly go up and up, there's a point where your performance in the gym will decrease, and you'll have gone above your maximum recoverable volume, so you're no longer recovering and you're no longer adapting, and you're just getting worse and worse and worse. Now, that being said, in order to make the overload principle work, you have to have specific training. So you're sticking in 6 to 12 reps, and in order to create overload, right, you need to add sets or reps or add weight, which is microloading. And microloading is, say you're bench pressing 50 kilos. Now, in order to overload that, the next week you'd bench press 51.2 kilos. No, I mean 52.5 kilos. And you just add the 1.25 kilos on each side of the barbell. Or that's about adding 2 pounds onto the, I think that's 2 pounds. No, you're adding about 5 pounds onto the barbell each time. So keeping that in mind, that's micro-loading. You're increasing the amount of weight every single time. And if you can go up to 2 kilos and 5 kilos depending on how strong you're getting during your mesocycles and your macrocycles. Adding reps and sets is a little bit more easier because adding weight, not everybody can do it. It depends how your body specifically adapts to the training, depending on your genetics, lifestyle, and supplements, and a whole range of different other things, but we won't get into that now. So then, just looking at this graph, it really encompasses everything about overload, and I hope you guys learned something useful. You have to implement this tool if you want to get stronger, because if you're worried about should I train twice a week, or you're worried about your time under tension, or you're worried about different kinds of minutia, and you're not focused on overload, right? It's the same thing with the foundation that I talked about in the previous video of specificity. If you don't have that foundation, everything else that you build on top of it is just going to collapse or not even be worth it. So, very important principle. You need to include it, because if you get specificity and overload right, you can kind of mess up the other following principles, and you will still achieve a good deal amount of results. So hope you guys learned something useful. I'll be back hopefully tomorrow with the next video with fatigue management, I believe, which is principle 3. And hope you guys enjoyed something useful. If you did like this, like it and share it. So catch you guys in the next video.